guys, it's Olivia and welcome back to Live in Literature. Thank you so much for all the love and support I received on my last video, and if you have not seen it yet, feel free to head on over to my channel to check it out. Okay guys, as you've seen from this week's title of the video, we are talking about romantasy versus fantasy romance.
Ready? Fight!
Now, if you are new to the book world, welcome. It's a great place to be.
But I don't want to go among mad people.
Oh, you can't help that. Most everyone's mad here.
But if you are not, and you've been kind of here for a minute, you've been seeing that this new genre called romantasy is being branded and thrown around like willy-nilly in the book world.
That's where I see things just a little differently. Contract or no, I will not bow to any sponsor.
Romantasy. What is romantasy? Everyone describes romantasy as romantic fantasy. Personally for me, and this is just my personal opinion, I feel like romantasy and fantasy romance are two completely different things.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
And you're thinking to yourself, they're the exact same words. Romantic fantasy, fantasy romance. Yes, I am aware. I'm aware that they're basically the same thing. Book Talk has branded this term, romantasy, as this new genre of like, oh my gosh, these romantic fantasy books that just like are just like, they just take a hold of you and whatever. Yes, I love romantasy, quote unquote. I love romantasy and I love fantasy romance. But personally for me, and my own personal opinion, and if you don't agree with this, that's fine. But also I personally think there's a difference. I think there's a difference between romantasy and fantasy romance.
But what does that have to do with anything?
No, he's got a point.
Because I see the people on Book Talk and they're like, I want something that gives me the same vibes as this book and this book and this book. And then people make suggestions to them that are like this book, this book, and this book. And I'm like, that's not going to quell the flaming fiery urge and quell the fire within them to have the story that they want. There's a massive difference, in my opinion, between fantasy romance and romantasy, because I think they achieve two different things. First of all, I think that romantasy are romance-heavy plots with a more fantasy subplot. So I feel like, in my opinion, if a book is a romantasy, the plot cannot stand without the romance. And then if it's a fantasy romance, I think that the romance is more of a subplot that can become larger over time. But in the beginning, without the fantasy element and the plot that they've created, the book cannot stand on its own.
Why don't you stick to your books, schoolboy?
So personally, I feel like people make really good suggestions of they're like, I want books that give me this energy, this romantic vibe in the romantasy era, but then someone will suggest for them a fantasy romance, not a romantasy. And then they're disappointed because they're like, I thought it was going to be like this book, or I thought it was going to be like that book. And it's not, because it's not a romantasy, it's a fantasy romance, or vice versa. Someone might be like, I want a book that is like so fantasy oriented and then it has this incredible romance that comes up eventually, and it's also more of a burn, and it takes some time and stuff, but also like has incredible fantasy plot with a romance subplot. But regardless of what you believe or don't believe, I'm here today to recommend some of my these are all 5-star romantasy and fantasy romances. So you can kind of catch a drift of like what I'm going to be recommending for you today, based on your personality, whether you want to read romantasy or you want to read fantasy romance. Personally for me, I think if I have to pick between the two, I'm a fantasy romance girl.
What? Making a decision without me?
I think fantasy romance plots are a little bit stronger. I feel like I think it's just like next level writing. I think it's next level craftsmanship. But regardless of what you feel on the idea, this is just going to be some of my 5-star best romantasy and fantasy romance recommendations for you so that you can read them and do with them what you will, recommend them to other people. But I just think that Book Talk needs to make the distinction that there is a difference between a romantasy book and a fantasy romance book. So that's what I'm here to do with you guys today. First on the list, because we have to get it out of the way, I want to bring up ACOTAR, A Court of Mist and Fury, or A Court of Thorns and Roses, which is the first book, versus TOG, which is Throne of Glass. For the Sarah J. Maas girls and guys and gays and theys out there, you understand Throne of Glass versus ACOTAR. Currently, my Throne of Glass copies are on loan to someone else. They're on loan, so just pretend my Throne of Glass copy is here. Now, I'm here to talk about the difference. Personally, for me, A Court of Mist and Fury is a romantasy. For me, if the romantic plot is not in this book, the book cannot stand on its own. I feel like it's not nearly as strong as a book. It's an incredible book. I think it's still in my like top 3 best books ever written that I've ever read. Like, I truly adore this book. Then you have Throne of Glass, or TOG, as this SJM peeps call it. TOG, Throne of Glass. This is an incredible fantasy series. Throne of Glass to me is a fantasy romance. The fantasy plot and this element of the book is what's holding the whole book together. If the romance wasn't in it, the story could still stand and it is still strong and it is still beautiful and it is still magical. I'm a Throne of Glass girl all the way. You guys know this. Daddy Rowan Whitethorn, I love you. That's my baby boy.
My hero.
I love him. So I am very much a Throne of Glass girl because it is a fantasy romance, whereas ACOTAR, or A Court of Mist and Fury, A Court of Thorns and Roses, whatever, is a romantasy. So you're kind of seeing the difference between the two. Now, are they both incredible series? Yes. Should you read both of them? Yes, because they're both incredible. But I will say that, in my opinion, this is a romantasy and TOG, or Throne of Glass, is a fantasy romance.
Okay. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Next, moving on to one of my most absolute new favorite books of the year is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. If you can guess where I'm headed with this one, we have an incredible romantasy book. Ali Hazelwood's Bride is literally so good. The romance in this is killer. It's a killer enemies to lovers. It's werewolves, vampires, it's hot and it's sexy. This to me, though, is a romantasy, not a fantasy romance. I think it's fairly obvious that anyone would say that this is a romantasy. The book without the romance would be dead. There would be nothing in this book worth reading.
That might have been, might have taken it a little bit too far.
But the romantasy element, the romantic element between these two characters, it is hot and it is heavy.
Oh, my face just got hot. Oh my God, my face just got hot.
It's everything. And for the girlies who like want to really get into some new stuff in the fantasy paranormal world, get into this. Bride was incredible. I talked about it on my book talk. I'm freaking obsessed. So get into this book. It's freaking awesome. Then you have one of Book Talk's most famous and up and coming fantasy romances, One Dark Window. Again, this one is an extremely strong fantasy. The magic system in this book is incredible. I think the magic system, this is one of the most unique magic systems I think I've ever read about. Like, truly the magic system in this one is flawless in my opinion. One Dark Window is a gothic fantasy romance about a young woman named Elspeth. The magic system in this book is based on cards, and whether you possess certain cards, you have certain powers and gain certain abilities, but there's also consequences to when you use these quote-unquote magic cards.
The cards will tell.
Again, this one, an incredible fantasy romance. The romance in this is palpable. The tension is really good. But again, I think that the book could stand without the romance. The book can stand on its own in this fantasy element. I just think it's so well written and it's a really strong fantasy romance. Moving on to the very popular Powerless by Lauren Roberts. In my opinion, a romantasy. This book reads romantasy. There's no other way that it could be read. The tension and the sexual tension in this book, girl, you could cut it with a literal knife.
Man, you could cut the tension with a knife.
Do not make eye contact.
The way this man describes the main female character's eyes is poetry. It's poetry in motion. I think the romance element in this book is absolutely flawless. I loved this book. I had a great time reading it. For me, like, I think I was a little bit disappointed because I kind of wanted it to read a little older because I'm older. So like, that's not any fault of the author or anything. That's just me being like a grown up and like me reading a YA book meant for like ages like 14 to 18 or whatever. So like, I digress. The book is fabulous. It's a really fun and fast read. Like, you're going to enjoy it regardless. I wish I had read a little older, but regardless, that's not like the author's fault. That's a me problem. I'm the problem. It's me.
It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me.
Right. So, like I said, this is an incredible romantasy. This romance plot is heavy and it is really, really good. And the tension, oh my gosh, it is so palpable. It's very much like knives to throats, enemies to lovers. I live for it. It's an incredible romantasy. Moving on to like, I think what is going to be one of my most favorite books that I read this year, Serpents in the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent, is a fabulous fantasy romance. Again, we're headed into vampire territory. I talked about it all in my last video last time, all about how my new obsession with the vampires. The vampire fixation is hot and it is heavy, and I can't stop thinking about vampires. I'm so obsessed, and this book is what started it all. Carissa Broadbent, she might end up being in my, like, I think she's in my top, I'm gonna say she's now in my top 5 favorite authors. Like, I love her so much. She writes incredible books, and the plot in this is so unique and interesting. It's just nothing, it's like a world I just have never seen before. I'm just absolutely obsessed. The vampire element is incredible. The fantasy is just beautiful. The magic system's really interesting, and the vampire element is really spooky and gothic. I kind of love this darker side of the fantasy world that I'm getting into. And there is romance, and it is so good. It's so good. But like I said, I think this is a fantasy romance, not a romantasy. But give this book a try. It is so good. Moving on to one of Book Talk's most favorite books of last year, Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I love Divine Rivals. I'm obsessed with Divine Rivals. This was in my 2023 best books of the year. Divine Rivals, in my opinion, is a flawless book. It's a flawless romantasy book. And this also, I would say, falls into a category of like historical fantasy as well, because it's not like a hot and heavy true like fantasy with like fairies and dragons, whatever. But I think fantasy just like, it takes all sorts of facets, and like it can be anything really. To me, Divine Rivals is a gorgeous romantasy. The romantic plot in this is just like, it's the streamline that's holding us together. We're on the train, woo woo, of romance.
Bye bye.
The romantic tension is palpable between our two MCs, Iris and Roman. Literally one of the most like soft and beautiful and like very poignant and just like a well understood romance between these two people. And I love the way that it blossoms throughout this book. I can't talk enough about this book. I just love it. It's a book that will stick with you because of how like gorgeous it is. And the second one, Ruthless Vows, is so good. But like I said, a gorgeous romantasy that you guys need to check out. Moving on to one of my top 3 favorite authors to exist of all time. That is Miss V.E. Schwab with A Darker Shade of Magic. Again, V.E. Schwab, one of the single greatest authors to ever walk the face of the earth. I'm freaking obsessed with her. Her writing is immaculate. Her plots are fantastic. I will take no criticism about V.E. Schwab.
I have no comment on that. Thank you.
Truly, like, one of the most, like, articulate and, like, pays attention to the fine details. From page 1, she sucks you into a world that you just like do not want to leave and you cannot escape. And she's done that by writing A Darker Shade of Magic. Like, truly, it's one of my most favorite trilogies of all time. And then she's doing a spin-off series called The Fragile Threads of Power. So incredible. I'm literally so excited. I read the first book, came out last year. It was great. Loved. Can't wait for the rest of the trilogy. But this one, A Darker Shade of Magic, is a gorgeous fantasy story about a young man named Kel. You get sucked into this world of 3 different like essentially like dimensions of London. Like, there's red London, gray London, white London, and then secretly black London. And these are all like, they all have different elements to them, and they're all different like versions of this world that one man can pass through. His name is Kel. He's got magic. It's literally like incredible. It's one of my most favorite fantasy series that I recommend to people. It's incredible. And there is some romance to it. You don't really get to the romance until later on, but like when it comes up, it's so cute. It's freaking gorgeous. But regardless, this is for my people who are like more fantasy romance focused and more fantasy focused than romance focused.
Right? I'm sitting in this chair. I come before you horny.
But this is a great series. I cannot recommend it enough. Moving on to, I think, one of Book Talk's most favorite trilogies to ever recommend. We have the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy by Stephanie Garber. So romantic. This is one that the whole book is literally about love. It's about literally love. It's about a young woman who is in love with someone and he's marrying someone else, and she goes to the Prince of Hearts and she basically begs him to like let her lover be in love with her. And then he tricks her and it goes into this whole thing. It's a big debacling mess. But I will say this book is very whimsical, very fanciful. It's very like young and spirited. It's beautiful. It's very like magically written. Like, you read it and you're just like, oh my gosh, like the words just like fly off the page and you just feel so like in this world of whimsy and folkness. I just like love it. It's beautiful. but it is very like, it's very much a book that's like romance heavy. Like the plot is like, we're on the romance train. It is romantasy. Yeah. This is not a fantasy romance. This is a romantasy. Regardless, it's a great trilogy. I highly recommend to everyone. It's such a great book. And last but certainly not least, a gorgeous fantasy romance. We have The Foxglove King by Hannah Wynne. I absolutely adore Hannah Wynne. This is an incredible book. Again, this one we're dealing with more of like a gothic, very like dark and spooky kind of magic. The magic system in this one is like very unique and very interesting. It's a lot of to do with kind of like necromancy and like dark magic and like raising the dead. It's very cool. It's like poison magic. I just love it. The main character, Lore, is super likable. She's like very headstrong. There is a romance element happening throughout, but like I said, it's not the major plot point. The major plot point is following her as she enters this like new world. She essentially like has dark magic. The king finds out, she expects to go to the pyre and burn to death for her sins, but the king has use of her. And so she enters this like lavish court and like has to learn how to deal with politics and religion of this world. The politics and religion of the book is like a huge deal. And that's something that I love about this, like the fantasy element of it. It's like a very interesting system. And then you have this like romance like lying underneath that I know is going to flourish into something even greater in book 2. I cannot wait to hear more. This is a fabulous, very gothic, spooky book. Cannot recommend it enough. I love Hannah Wynne. I think she's such a talented author. And I definitely recommend you guys go check out this fantasy romance.
Sounds creepy. Let's go!
So that is all the books that I have to recommend for you guys today. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And if you did, do not forget to like, comment, subscribe to the Live in Literature YouTube channel. We are only 3 subscribers away from 500 people. 3 subscribers away. And once we reach 500, I'm going to do a book giveaway for 2 books and a book boyfriend bookmark of your choice. So we only need 3 more subscribers to make it to 500, and then we will be doing a book giveaway, which I'm so excited. We've done several on my channel in the past, and I can't wait to keep doing them. So that is the conclusion of my romantasy versus fantasy romance. I hope that you see my point when I talk about a fantasy romance versus a romantasy, and kind of see what I'm talking about. I just feel like there is a difference in the book world, and if you're going to make recommendations to people, you need to be prepared of what kind of story you're getting. So I hope that you all take this as some advice of like, what should I recommend to someone versus it's a romantasy or a fantasy romance? Ask people what's important to them. For me, it's important that I recommend to you guys what I think you're going to want to read, whether that's romantasy or fantasy romance, because I love both. And I'm assuming you guys all love both too, because at the end of the day, they're all incredibly well-written books that I've recommended for you. And I hope that you enjoy reading them if you ever get a chance. But thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And thanks so much for watching the channel. I love you so much, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.